My husband died in a fire 6 years ago. I sent his present 650 every month until my neighbor swift. There is something you need to know. Hi, welcome to Family Revenge. Enjoy my new story.
My husband died in a warehouse fire 6 years ago. Since then, every month I've been paying off the debt he left behind. 3 jobs. No way out. Everything started to change when my son began acting strange, talking about a man who looks like Dad who visits his grandparents' house. Then one morning, my neighbor pulled me aside and whispered, "I saw something that shouldn't have existed in this world for a long time." And that was the moment I started to wonder, what really died in that fire? I'm genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time here. Now tell me, where in the world are you watching from, city, country? Wherever you are, let me know below. Just so you know, some elements of this story are fictional included to serve the narrative and educational purpose. Similarities to any names or places are coincidental, but everything this story teaches, that was always intentional. Friday afternoon, and Memphis was doing what it always does in late September, holding on to the last warmth of summer like it didn't want to let go. The trees along Lamar Avenue still had their leaves, but the air carried that faint edge of coming change, the kind you feel more in your bones than on your skin. I had just finished my second shift, 4 hours on my knees, scrubbing tile floors at the hospital on Union Avenue, and my lower back was reminding me of every one of those hours. I drove across town to pick up Isaiah from Henrietta and Alonso's apartment the way I did every Friday when my shift ran long. He was standing outside on the front step when I pulled up, backpack on both hands, gripping the straps so tight his knuckles had gone pale. He didn't wave. He just walked to the car, opened the door, and climbed in. No "Hi, Mama," no story about recess, no song. Isaiah always sang in the car. Since he was 4 years old, that child would belt out whatever was stuck in his head the moment he buckled his seatbelt. Old church hymns from Sunday school. Cartoon theme songs made up lyrics that didn't make sense, but made me laugh until my sides hurt. It was our thing. Our little ritual that said, "Everything is okay, Mama. I'm here, and I'm fine." That Friday there was nothing. Just the engine and the city moving past outside. "How was your day, baby?" I asked. "Fine," he said. "Did you and Deshawn play after school?" A pause. "No." I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was staring out the side window, jaw-tight eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Those eyes. Desmond's eyes, same deep brown, same long lashes, but the look in them was nothing like a 9-year-old's. It was the look of someone carrying something too heavy, something they didn't know how to put down. I didn't push, I just drove. By the time we got home, the sun had dropped low, and the kitchen light felt too yellow, too tired. I made smothered pork chops, rice, and the collard greens I'd stretched since Sunday. Isaiah ate maybe 6 bites, said he wasn't hungry, and asked to be excused. I watched him disappear down the hall. Then I sat alone and looked at my hands. The skin around my knuckles was cracked and dry, no lotion fully fixed what the cleaning chemicals did day after day. I was 57 years old, and my hands looked 20 years older than the rest of me. On the corner of the table, held down by the salt shaker, was the envelope. White, plain, already sealed. $650 inside cash, same as every month for the past 6 years. 5 more payments left. 5 months, then this would be over. I did the math the way I always did when the weight got too heavy. 6 years, 12 months, $650. 72 payments. 46,000. $800, every cent scraped from 3 jobs. The hospital cleaning, the weekend laundry service, the Wednesday evening shift at the diner on Summer Avenue. 3 jobs. 1 child. 6 years, for a debt that was never supposed to be mine. Henrietta had called me into the back room at the funeral home the night we buried Desmond. Just the two of us. I thought she wanted to pray. Instead, she laid a single sheet of paper on the folding table between us. Handwritten numbers. No letterhead. No official seal. She told me Desmond had borrowed $47,000. Not from a bank. From people who didn't use courts, didn't file paperwork, but knew where you lived and where your child went to school. She didn't say it as a threat. She said it like a warning about a coming storm. I looked at that paper. I thought about Isaiah, 3 years old, asleep at my mother's house across town. I thought about what it meant to have people who didn't use paperwork show up at your door. I signed. What I didn't know, what Norbert, my lawyer, would tell me years later, was that the paper had no legal standing at all. No notarization, no witnesses, no identified creditor. In Tennessee, a document like that cannot be enforced in any court. It wasn't worth the paper it was written on. But that night in the back room of the funeral home, I didn't know any of that. I just knew I had a son, and I was afraid. I checked on Isaiah before I sat at the altar. He was asleep, curled on his side backpack dropped by the door. I pulled his blanket up and stood there watching him breathe. That was always the moment that cut through everything else. Just him sleeping, just the sound of his breath. I sat before Desmond's photo the way I did every night, white candle, his favorite watch. His face smiling back at me like he knew something good was about to happen. I told him about the hospital floors, the tired drive, the envelope. I told him Isaiah had been quiet tonight. The wrong kind of quiet. 5 more months, baby, I said. 5 more months, and we're free. I turned off the lamp and walked back to close Isaiah's door. The house had gone quiet the way old houses do, settling sounds, the refrigerator hum, the distant noise of the street. And then, barely a breath, barely a sound, Isaiah murmured in his sleep. "Don't tell Mama. Don't tell Mama." I stood in the dark doorway and did not move. My son was 9 years old. He was supposed to be dreaming about cartoons and recess and ordinary things that belong to 9-year-olds. I stood there long after his breathing evened out again. Don't tell Mama. What had my child been told to keep from me? Monday morning, the alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. I opened my eyes in the dark and lay still for exactly 30 seconds. Not because I needed to wake up. My body had learned to brace for the alarm before it sounded. After enough years of early mornings, I lay there because those 30 seconds were the only ones of the day that belonged entirely to me before the list started, before my feet hit the floor and the day took over. Then I sat up. The first thing I reached for was the small blue tub of hand cream on the nightstand. Every single morning, work it into the knuckles, into the cracks along the fingers, into the dry patches on my palms that never fully healed. The chemicals at the hospital, the hot water at the laundry, 6 years of those things had done something permanent to my hands. My mother had hands like this by 70. I was 57. I pulled on my uniform in the dark, set Isaiah's breakfast out before I left: cereal, a banana, his vitamins lined up beside the bowl. Wrote his name on the brown bag the way I had since kindergarten, even though he could read it just fine. Some habits you keep not because they're necessary, but because they're the one soft thing in a hard day. I was out the door by 5. The Whitehaven Laundry Facility on Elvis Presley Boulevard opened at 5:15. A long, low building that smelled of industrial soap and warm rubber from the dryer belts before you even got through the door. My station was the sorting line, incoming linens from 3 hospital contracts, separated by type, checked for damage, logged, and sent through. It sounds simple until you've done it for 4 hours straight without sitting down. My hands worked the sorting line, and my mind did the math the way it always did. 6 years, 72 months, $650 a month, $46,800. I ran that number against everything it could have been instead. A reliable used car paid off. A year of Isaiah's college tuition at a state school. A savings account with something real in it. A week somewhere he'd never been, somewhere with a beach or mountains or just something different from the only streets he'd ever known. Instead, it had gone into white envelopes addressed to a P.O. box. Every cent of it. By the time I crossed town to my second job, the afternoon light had gone flat and gray. The office building on Madison Avenue was 6 floors of glass and steel housing, an insurance company, and 2 law firms. I came in weekday afternoons to clean the common areas, the restrooms, the elevator banks. Quieter work than the laundry. more solitary, which I usually preferred. Sterling worked the building's maintenance crew, a tall man in his mid-40s, methodical, always moving at the same steady pace. We'd developed the kind of easy familiarity that comes from passing each other in the same hallways enough times. That Monday afternoon, I was cleaning the floor-to-ceiling windows on the third floor, the squeegee moving in long, even strokes, my mind already on the evening, the envelope on my kitchen table. The drive to Orange Mound, the 3 flights of stairs, the iron door that never opened all the way. Loretta? I turned. Sterling stood near the elevator bay holding a replacement light panel, watching me with an expression I recognized. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said, and gave him the short, automatic smile I kept ready for exactly these moments. He held the space open a little longer, the way he always did, not pressing, not prying, just leaving a door ajar in case I changed my mind. "Long day," he said. "They're all long, I said. He nodded slowly, turned back to the elevator panel, and let me be. That was what I appreciated about Sterling. He never pushed. But he never pretended not to notice either. By past 7 that evening, I was climbing the stairs at Henrietta and Alonso's building in Orange Mound. 3 stories, elevator permanently out of service, the out-of-order sign yellowed with age. I knocked on 3C. A long pause. The chain rattled. The door opened 6 inches, held by the chain, and Henrietta's eyes went straight to the envelope in my hand, not to my face. I held it out. She took it without a word, folded it once, and tucked it into her housecoat pocket. We stood on either side of that door, and I thought about what she had never once done in 6 years, asked how Isaiah was doing. Not his grades, not his health, not whether he was happy. Not one question. Her own grandson. 5 more months, I said. I didn't know why. Maybe I just needed to hear myself say it. Henrietta said nothing. She pulled the door closed. The deadbolt turned. The chain slid back into place. I put my hand on the stairwell railing and started down. That was when I heard it. Laughter from behind the closed door. Not the low, tired sound of 2 elderly people at the end of a long day. Fuller than that. Younger. Coming from somewhere deeper in the apartment. The kind of laugh that came from someone comfortable at ease somewhere they belonged. I stopped on the second step down and stood completely still. Then the television volume jumped sharply, a sudden, deliberate climb, and the laugh disappeared underneath it. I stood on that step another moment. Alonzo and Henrietta had no family left in Memphis. Desmond had been their only child. I knew the neighbors on both sides by sight. I didn't know whose laugh that was. I gripped the railing and kept walking down. 2 days had passed since that Monday night on the stairwell, and the sound still hadn't left me. Not the television cutting up loud that I could explain. What I couldn't explain was the laugh underneath it, the one that got swallowed before it could settle into anything I could name. It sat in the back of my mind the way a splinter sits under skin, not sharp enough to stop you, just present enough that you never quite forgot it was there. I pulled up in the school pickup line at 3:15 on Wednesday. The September sun came in at that long autumn angle that made everything look a little more golden than it was. Isaiah came out through the side door, and I watched him the way I always did. A 9-year-old's whole emotional state lives in his walk. If the day was good, he walked like he had somewhere to be. Today, his shoulders were doing all the talking. He got in, buckled his seatbelt, settled his backpack between his feet. Then, instead of looking out the window, he looked straight at me in the rearview mirror. Steady, like he'd been rehearsing something on the walk from the door to the car. "Mama," he said, "do you have a boyfriend?" I kept my hands on the wheel. I kept my face neutral and my breathing even, which took more effort than I would have liked. That was not a 9-year-old's question. Not unless someone older had put that word in his mouth with a purpose behind it. "Where'd that come from, baby?" I said. Gentle, curious, not alarmed. He looked out the window. His jaw tightened the way it had been doing lately. "Just wondering," he said. "You can wonder anything you want," I said. "And you can ask me anything you know that right." He nodded but said nothing else. I let it sit. 6 years of raising a child alone had taught me one ironclad rule you don't chase. You make the space wide and quiet and safe, and you wait. The moment a child feels cornered, they go somewhere inside themselves where you can't reach them. Hungry? I asked. A little? I was thinking smothered chicken tonight. That got a small flicker across his face, not quite a smile, but close enough. I cooked while he did his reading at the kitchen table, close enough that we could see each other without either of us having to try. I talked while I worked, not at him, not requiring anything back. About a woman at the laundry who got her scarf caught in the conveyor belt. About a pigeon that had gotten into the office lobby and caused more disruption than any pigeon had a right to. Small things, funny things, the ordinary texture of a day laid out like a table set for two. By the time the food was on the table, Isaiah was eating, actually eating, and he laughed at the pigeon story, a real laugh from his stomach. The wall was lower tonight than it had been on Friday. I filed that away. Homework time was at his desk. I pulled the extra chair beside him, not hovering, just present. The lamp threw a warm circle of light onto his fraction worksheet. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its evening sounds music from down the block. A car passing slow, the particular quiet of a street after dinner. He was halfway through the fractions when he spoke. Mama. There's a man that comes to Grandma's house sometimes. I did not move. I kept my eyes on the old worksheet I was holding and kept my voice exactly where it had been all evening. Yeah, one of Grandpa Alonso's friends. He shook his head, pencil slowing. He plays with me. He knows my name. A pause. He told me not to tell you. He said it would make you sad. I set down the worksheet. Someone had given my son a reason to keep a secret that was dressed up as protection. Whoever this man was, he knew exactly how to talk to a 9-year-old. Baby. I said, if something makes you feel like you have to carry it alone, that's not a secret worth keeping. Not from me. Protecting you, that's my job, not yours. He stared at the desk. Then in a voice so small I had to lean in, he said, you're gonna get a new husband and forget about me. He said only Grandma and him really love me. I put my pen down carefully so it didn't make a sound. Something moved through my chest. Not panic. Not yet. The particular cold that comes when you realize someone has been inside your home without using any of the doors. Baby, look at me. He looked up, eyes wet at the edges. There is nothing in this world that could make me forget about you. Not a new day. Not a new year. Not a new anything. You are the whole point. Do you hear me? He nodded. Can you tell me one more thing? I said. What does this man look like? Isaiah thought carefully the way kids do when they're trying to be precise. He looks like Daddy, he said, like the picture on the shelf in the living room. I stood up. I walked down the short hallway through the screen door and onto the porch, and I stood there while the Memphis evening wind came in off the street, cool and indifferent. My hands were shaking, not from the cold. The days between Wednesday and Friday had been quiet in the way that isn't really quiet at all, the kind where the noise is all internal, where you go through the motions of a normal life while something underneath keeps turning over and over without resolution. I had cooked, cleaned, done laundry, gotten Isaiah to school, worked my shifts. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, I had been having the same conversation with myself on a loop. He looks like Daddy. Like the picture on the shelf. I told myself what any reasonable person would tell themselves. Isaiah was 9 years old. He had lost his father at 3, which meant he barely had a real memory of Desmond. Just the photograph on the living room shelf. The stories I'd told him, the shape of a man assembled from second-hand pieces. A boy who misses something he never fully had will sometimes find it where it isn't. That's not confusion. That's just grief doing what grief does to children. I believed that. I almost entirely believed that. Friday afternoon, I was on the second floor of the office building on Madison Avenue working the tall window panels that face the street. The late September light came in at a low slant by 4 o'clock, turning everything gold and slightly overexposed the way Memphis looks in the last hour before the city shifts gears for evening. This was usually my favorite moment of the workday. Not because it was easy, but because the light made even the glass feel worth cleaning. I could look down at the street below and watch the world move without being part of it just for a minute. The Friday rush had started early. The sidewalk below was dense office workers heading for their cars, a food cart doing last-minute business on the corner, a city bus pulling away from the curb in a low exhale of diesel. I watched it all the way. I watched the nature documentary Isaiah had picked out present, but not attached, just letting it move. And then I stopped moving the squeegee. Below in the flow of foot traffic heading east, there was a man in a navy blue shirt and a dark, low-pulled hat. He was walking at a steady pace, hands in his pockets, head slightly down. From 2 floors up, I couldn't see his face. What I could see was his shoulders, specifically the way the right one sat lower than the left, a slight asymmetry that was so particular, so specific, that my body recognized it before my mind did. And his walk. That rhythm. That particular way of letting the left foot land just a half beat heavier than the right, not a limp. Not a drag, just a cadence so specific to one person that I had once teased Desmond about it. I could pick you out of 1,000 people just by the way you walk. I had told him once, years ago, in a kitchen that no longer existed. He had laughed and said that was because I'd been watching him too closely. I had said that was exactly right. The squeegee hit the floor. I was already moving. Down the stairs, not the elevator. There was no time. 2 flights through the lobby, the security door, and out onto the sidewalk. The evening air hit me like a wall, warm and exhaust-scented, and I pushed into the foot traffic heading east, turning my head looking for a navy blue shirt and a low, dark hat, and a walk I would know anywhere. He was gone. I stood on the sidewalk in the middle of the rush hour, current people splitting around me the way water splits around a stone, and I turned a full circle, looking east, looking west, checking the corner, checking the bus stop. Nothing. The crowd had absorbed him the way crowds absorb everything completely without a trace. I stood there longer than I should have, breathing hard from the stairs, my chest doing something that wasn't quite panic, but was close enough to borrow its face. A woman with a stroller detoured around me with a sideways look. A teenager on a bike swerved wide. I was standing completely still in a moving stream, and I couldn't make myself move. It wasn't him. It was never him. Desmond is dead. I said it to myself the way you say something you need to be true. Sterling was on the front steps when I turned back toward the building, holding the door open for a delivery, and he saw me before I could arrange my face into anything useful. His expression shifted not dramatically, just a small recalibration, the kind that meant he'd clocked that something was wrong. Loretta. He said my name, the way he always did. Not a question, exactly. Not a statement. Just an open space where I could put something if I wanted to. I'm fine, I said. You're breathing like you ran. I thought I left something outside. He looked at me steadily. Sterling had been working this building for 2 years, and in that time he had watched me give that same answer. I'm fine. It's nothing. Everything's okay more times than either of us had counted. He never pushed. But he never pretended not to notice. Okay, he said. I went back inside. I picked up the squeegee from where I'd dropped it, wiped the handle down, and went back to the window. The street below was ordinary again. Just people moving in the last of the afternoon light. I finished the shift. That evening, after Isaiah was at the table with his reading assignment, and the kitchen smelled like the reheated soup I'd put together from whatever was in the refrigerator, I went to the bedroom closet and pulled out the wedding album from the shelf where it had sat for 6 years. I told myself I was just looking, just settling something. I sat on the edge of the bed and went through it slowly, not the way you flip through an album when you're feeling sentimental, but the way you look at something when you're checking it against a memory. I was looking at his shoulders in every photograph, the way he stood, the angle of his body when he wasn't posed but just caught mid-motion by someone with a camera. I pulled up the wedding video on my phone, the one saved to my photos folder. 17 minutes long, and I skipped through it watching the way he moved across the frame. Right shoulder slightly lower, left foot landing a half beat heavier. I set the phone down. I stared at the wall. It was just a man with a similar build. Memphis is a city. There are 1 million men in this city. I turned the album pages. His 28th birthday at his cousin's house. The church picnic 2016. The cookout in the backyard 2017. The last one before everything changed. And then I turned to the page from my birthday dinner in the spring of 2015. Desmond was standing at the end of the table mid-laugh, head tilted back. He was wearing a navy blue shirt, the same one he always pulled out for occasions, soft cotton. A small worn patch near the left cuff that I had darned twice, and he had never let me throw away. A navy blue shirt. I closed the album very carefully, the way you close something you're not sure you want to open again. I set it beside me on the bed, and I sat in the dark of the bedroom for a long moment. The house quiet around me, the sound of Isaiah turning a page drifting down the hall. The man on the street this afternoon had been wearing a navy blue shirt. It was a coincidence. Obviously, it was a coincidence. Navy blue was not a rare color. Half of Memphis owned a navy blue shirt. I was a woman who hadn't slept a full night in years, whose 9-year-old had just told her a man who looked like her dead husband had been whispering in his ear, and I was reading meaning into laundry. That was what I told myself. I told myself that right up until I turned off the lamp and sat in the full dark of the living room, the album on my lap, and the photograph behind my eyes, and felt that same splinter sensation, the one that had started on the stairwell Monday night, press a little deeper. It has to be a coincidence. It has to be. Sunday morning, I was up before the alarm, standing at the bathroom mirror with a purpose I hadn't had in days. I put on my good blouse, the deep burgundy one I kept for church, and for occasions that required me to look like I had it together, even when I didn't. I pressed my slacks. I pinned my hair back the way my mother always said made me look like a woman who meant business. I did all of this deliberately, like I was putting on armor, because this time I was going to pay attention. Every other Sunday visit for 6 years I had shown up on autopilot drop. Isaiah, offhand over the envelope when it was that time of month, exchanged the minimum number of words with Henrietta. Go home. I had moved through those visits the way you move through a task you've done so many times it stops requiring thought. This Sunday I was going to watch. We pulled up to the Orange Mound building just after 2. Isaiah had been quiet in the car again, but differently quiet. There was something almost eager underneath it this time. A low-level energy he was trying not to show. I noticed it. I didn't say anything. I just watched him unbuckle his seatbelt a little faster than usual and grab his backpack off the floor. I followed him up all 3 flights. Henrietta opened the door before Isaiah even knocked. Her eyes went to him first, then to me, and something shifted behind them, a rapid, almost invisible adjustment, the kind a person makes when something appears that wasn't expected. Isaiah, come on in, baby, she said, and pushed the door wider for him. Then she shifted her body into the gap. Henrietta, I said pleasantly, thought I'd come up and say hello. House is a mess, she said. You know how it gets on Sundays. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Isaiah's fine here. I'll send him down at 5, same as always. I stood at the threshold and did not step back. In that one breath, I took in everything I could from where I stood. The smell hit me first. Rich layered cooking, not the light Sunday soup Henrietta usually made. This was the smell of a full meal, seasoned meat, something slow cooked. Cornbread coming out of an oven, a kitchen feeding more than 2 people. The television in the back room was already loud before we knocked. You look well, I told her and smiled back with the same calibration she'd given me. I'll be downstairs. She closed the door, the deadbolt turned. I did not go downstairs. I stood in the 3rd-floor hallway back against the wall beside the stairwell door. The hallway was empty. The neighbor in 3A kept to herself on Sundays. The couple in 3D traveled for work. I was alone up there, and I used every second of it. That smell moved under the door like it had somewhere to be. Whoever that cooking was for had been in that kitchen for a while. Then I heard it. Footsteps from the back of the apartment, not the careful, measured pace of an old man with a bad hip. These were heavier, more deliberate, moving toward the front of the apartment and then stopping suddenly completely, as if whoever was walking had heard something and gone still. The television volume jumped, same as Monday night. The same fast reach for the remote, the same wall of sound dropping over whatever had been underneath it. I stood in the hallway and felt the hair on my arms raise under my good blouse. Someone in that apartment knew I was still on this floor. I waited another full minute. Then I walked quietly to the stairwell and went downstairs to wait in the car. At 5 o'clock, Isaiah came down the way he always did, backpack on one shoulder, left shoelace coming undone by end of day. He got in and ate the apple slices I'd brought without being asked, which was a good sign. I let him settle. We passed the corner store on Dedrick, crossed onto Park Avenue. I kept my voice easy. "Did you eat? Smelled like Grandma was cooking something good?" "She made smothered chicken," Isaiah said. "Was it just you and Grandma and Grandpa?" A small pause. "And the man," he said quietly. I kept my eyes on the road. "Did he say anything to you today, baby?" His fingers found the zipper on his backpack and worked it back and forth, his habit when thinking through something he wasn't sure he should say. "He said Grandma loves me the most." A pause. "He said you're going to be too busy to take care of me when I get older. He said it's better if I stay with Grandma." I breathed through the length of a full stoplight before I spoke. "Isaiah, look at me." He turned. "You are mine. You were mine the day you were born, and you will be mine every day after that. Nobody gets to tell you any different. You hear me?" He nodded, chin doing the small trembling thing it did when he was trying not to cry. "Mama," he said carefully, "are you going to leave me for a new daddy?" The same question from Wednesday, word for word. Which meant in 4 days someone had gone back to my 9-year-old son and pressed on the same bruise again. Not a one-time comment, a campaign. I pulled up in front of the house. I put the car in park and sat with my hands on the wheel while Isaiah went inside ahead of me. Someone was systematically feeding fear into my child, and that someone had access that only came from being inside Henrietta's apartment on Sunday afternoons. I reached for my phone. In my contacts sat a name I had never dialed: Harriet Coleman, a private investigator out of Midtown Memphis, licensed and bonded, whose number a woman at my church had given me 3 years ago when I'd mentioned the debt. I had saved it and never used it. Told myself I didn't need it. I looked at that name for a long moment. If I press this, everything will change. I pressed call. Sunday night I had stared at my phone for a long time after Isaiah fell asleep. Harriet Coleman's name was still on the screen. The call that had connected rung twice. And then I'd ended it before she could answer. Not because I'd changed my mind. Because when I imagined the words I would need to say out loud, "I think my dead husband might be alive, and I think he's been inside my in-laws' apartment, and my 9-year-old son is my only witness," I heard how they sounded. A licensed investigator needed more than that. More than a grieving woman and a frightened child. I needed something real, someone with no reason to lie. I put the phone down and went to bed. Monday morning was gray and cool, the sky the color of old dishwater. I had Isaiah's breakfast laid out and his bag by the door before he woke up, and I was heading to the car for my first shift when I saw her. Laverne was on her front porch with a watering can, working her way along the railing where she kept her potted impatiens, deep pink and coral, no business looking that alive in late September. She had lived directly beside the Orange Mound building for going on 15 years, and in that time she had become the kind of neighbor who was simply part of the landscape, always present, always watching, always knowing more about the comings and goings of that block than anyone who actually lived in the building. She looked up when she saw me, and something in her expression changed. A small settling, like a woman who had been waiting for something to arrive. She set down the watering can and waved me over. I crossed the yard. She was already moving toward the front steps. "Come sit," she said. "I know you got somewhere to be, but this needs to be said." I told her first. The full shape of it, Isaiah's question on Wednesday, the man at Henrietta's on Sunday, the laugh behind the door, Monday night 2 weeks ago, the TV jumping to cover it, and the man I'd seen from the second floor of the office building on Friday, navy blue shirt, hat pulled low, a walk I would have known in a crowd of 1,000. Laverne listened the way certain women listen, completely, still hands folded in her lap, eyes on the middle distance. No interruptions, no sounds of sympathy or disbelief. She let me talk until I was done. When I finished, she looked left down the block, then right. "I've seen him," she said. The morning went very still around me. "How many times?" I asked. "Enough times that I stopped counting." She looked at her hands. "First time was about 2 years back, early spring. Warm evening, I was sitting out here after dinner. Saw a man coming up from the direction of Park Avenue, walking like he didn't want to be seen. Hat low, long beard, hands in his pockets. Parked all the way down by the corner, not in front of the building. Walked in through the side entrance. Never the front." She paused. "I thought could be anybody. But he came back. Always at dusk. Always the same way Parks far, walks close, uses the side door. In 2 years, I have never once seen that man use the front entrance of a building he clearly knows well enough to visit regular." She shook her head slowly. "A man who doesn't want to be seen isn't a man with nothing to hide." "Did you ever see his face?" I asked. "Once. About 8 months ago. February evening. He forgot to pull his hat all the way down and he passed under the streetlight on his way back to his car. Just for a second. I was on the porch with my coffee and I saw him clear enough. And," she turned and looked at me directly for the first time. Laverne had known me since before Desmond died. She had sat with me at the funeral. She had brought food to my house the first 3 Sundays after he was gone. "Honey," she said quietly, "I've been knowing you 15 years, and Desmond just about as long." She paused, weighing the words one more time before she let them go. "That man walks just like your Desmond used to walk. Same right shoulder sitting lower than the left. Same stride, that little extra weight on the left foot, like he's always about to turn. I know that walk." She folded her hands tighter. "I didn't say nothing before because I thought I was going crazy. The man is dead." I watched them lower the casket. So I told myself I was seeing things. A long pause. "But now, with what you're telling me about Isaiah..." She stopped. Let the sentence sit in the morning air unfinished. She didn't need to finish it. I stood up. My legs were steady, which surprised me. "Laverne," I said, "can you watch Isaiah this Saturday night?" She looked up from the step and I saw the understanding move across her face without a single question attached to it. "Long as you need, baby," she said. "Long as you need." I nodded and walked back to my car keys already in my hand. This time, when I called Harriet Coleman, I was going to stay on the line. Every piece of it, the stairwell, Isaiah's questions, the man in the navy blue shirt, and this morning on Laverne's porch. A woman who had known Desmond for 15 years and had watched the same man use the side entrance of his parents' building for 2 years was not a coincidence. That was a witness, and I was finally ready to use one. The drive to Midtown took 20 minutes on a Tuesday evening when the traffic had already thinned out. I had called Harriet Monday afternoon from the laundry facility parking lot, sitting in my car on my break with the engine running, and this time I had stayed on the line. I had said all the words, enough of them that she had gone quiet for a moment and then said, in the tone of someone rearranging their schedule in real time, "Come Tuesday, 7 o'clock, don't eat, I'll make something." I parked on Cooper Avenue and sat in the car for a moment before going up. Not because I was uncertain I was past uncertain. I sat there because I knew that once I walked through that door and put everything on that table, the shape of my life was going to be different. There was a before this and an after this, and I was about to step across the line. I picked up my purse and went up the front steps. Harriet Coleman opened the door the way she had been looking at me since we were both young women singing in the same choir at First Baptist Church, directly without performance. Taking in exactly what was there: 20 years of friendship, 18 years of investigative work. She had been in the room when Isaiah was born. She had been at Desmond's funeral. She took one look at my face and opened the door wider. "Come in, I'll make tea." Her apartment smelled like books and old cedar woodwork. On the coffee table, a legal pad and 2 pens sat beside a ceramic mug. She had prepared for this the same way she prepared for everything quietly in advance. She sat across from me with the legal pad in her lap and said, "Start from the beginning." So I did. All of it. The Friday Isaiah got into the car without a word, the laugh behind Henrietta's door, the TV cutting up loud to cover it. Isaiah asking me if I had a boyfriend in a voice that didn't belong to him. The man from the second floor window, navy blue shirt hat pulled low, right shoulder lower than the left. A walk I had spent 4 days trying to convince myself I'd imagined. Sunday dinner, the hallway, the heavy footsteps going suddenly silent. And Monday morning on Laverne's porch, every word of it. Harriet wrote steadily through all of it. She looked up twice, once when I described the walk, once when I mentioned Laverne had seen the man's face under a streetlight 8 months ago. Both times she underlined something and nodded for me to continue. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. Do you have any document with Desmond's original signature? Yes. I reached into my purse and pulled out the lease agreement from the Mill Branch Road house signed at our kitchen table in the spring of 2016. I hadn't known exactly why I'd brought it. I had just known she would ask. She took it carefully by the edges and set it on the coffee table. Did Desmond ever talk about LLCs or business ventures? No, I said. He worked the sawmill. That was it. She nodded once and opened her laptop. The shift was subtle, but complete the same way a room changes when you turn on the overhead light instead of the lamp. She moved through the Tennessee Secretary of State's business search database with the efficiency of someone who had done it hundreds of times. The portal is public record. Any citizen can search it without a court order or special access. Every LLC registered in the state is listed there. Formation date, registered agent, business address. I'm searching for any LLC registered under his full name or any close variation. She said, eyes on the screen. If he was operating under his own identity, even partly, it'll be here. 4 minutes later, she stopped typing. There's an LLC registered in Nashville, she said. Formation date, June 2019. She turned the screen toward me. Desmond was officially declared dead in October 2018. Yes, this company was registered 8 months after his official date of death. She pulled up the registered agent information. The name on the filing is a variation first name abbreviated, middle name used as last. The registered agent address is a Nashville mailbox service, not a residence. She paused. But the signature on the agent form, she placed the lease agreement beside the printed database page under the direct angle of the desk lamp. I stood beside her and looked at both. The signature on the lease was Desmond's. I had watched him sign it at our kitchen table. The signature on the LLC filing was modified. The first letter of the last name was different. The middle initial absent. But the underlying movement of the hand was the same. The way the D opened wide at the top. The way the final letter dropped below the line with a small hook. The heavier pressure on the downstrokes. This is the same hand, Harriet said. Modified to obscure, but the same hand. Someone who believed no one would ever look. I stared at those 2 signatures for a long time. 8 months after the funeral, he had been registering a business in Nashville under a version of his own name using his own hand because he was certain no one was coming. The arrogance of it landed somewhere past shock, somewhere that had no name yet. What do? I said. Right now, go home. Sleep. She looked at me directly. And Friday night, I need you to do something very hard. I need you to open the urn. The room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet after something that cannot be unsaid. I knew which urn. There was only one. I looked at Harriet. She looked back without flinching. I nodded. Before I show you what was inside that urn, comment, I'm here, so I know you're still with me. What do you think she's about to find? Note parts of this story include fictional elements built for storytelling and educational purposes. If that's not for you, this is a good place to stop. 3 days had passed since I sat in Harriet's living room and nodded at a question I couldn't answer out loud. 3 days of laundry and office floors and diner shifts. 3 days of Isaiah's breakfast and his reading log, and asking about his day in the car, moving through the ordinary surface of my life, while underneath it, something had been shifting in the dark. Friday night. Isaiah had been asleep for 2 hours. The house was quiet all the way down. I stood in the living room in the light of the single candle on the altar table and looked at the urn. Dark ceramic terracotta glazed in deep brown, about the size of a large coffee canister with a fitted lid I had never opened. Not once in 6 years. The funeral home had handed it to me in a velvet bag, and I had carried it home and set it on the table beside his photograph, beside the watch he wore every day of his adult life, beside the yellow chrysanthemums that had gone dry and papery this week because I had forgotten to replace them. 6 years of nights at this table. 6 years of sitting in this exact spot after the last shift, still in my uniform half the time, telling him about the day. About Isaiah losing his first tooth. About the first time our son said "Daddy" to the photograph, like he thought it could hear him, and how that had broken me open in a way I hadn't expected. Now my hands would not stop trembling. I sat down on the floor in front of the table, cross-legged the way I always sat. I looked at the urn for a long time without touching it. What if I'm wrong? What if I open this and it's what it's supposed to be? And I've been a woman who started seeing things from a second-floor window. Then I thought about Isaiah whispering, "Don't tell Mama," in his sleep. About the LLC registered 8 months after the funeral. About Laverne saying same right shoulder, same stride, like a woman confessing something she'd carried too long. I reached for the urn. The ceramic was cool and smooth under my fingers, with a slight ridge where the lid met the body, a ridge I had traced 100 times without ever lifting. I sat with my hands on the lid and said what I needed to say silently in my head. "I'm sorry. If you're in here, I'm sorry for every doubt I've had this week." Then I lifted the lid. I tipped the container slightly and poured a small amount into my left palm. I held my hand under the candlelight and looked. The color was right gray-white, the pale, dusty shade I had always imagined. From any distance, it looked exactly as it should. I looked closer. Cremation remains are not what most people imagine. In the days before Friday, I had looked it up quietly, the way you research things you are not sure you want to know. They are calcium phosphate mineralized bone ground into a coarse, uneven powder. Fragments irregular, never perfectly smooth. There is always something in them that reminds you they came from a body. What was in my palm was smooth. Perfectly, completely smooth. Every grain the same size as the next. No fragment, no variation, no irregularity. It had the slight, packed weight of beach sand. When I moved my thumb through it, it moved the way sand moves. I poured a little more to be certain. The same. I sat on the floor of my living room with a palm full of gray sand, and I did not cry. I had expected to cry. What came instead was something that had no name, a white, ringing silence that started behind my sternum and moved outward until it filled everything. 6 years. Every night at this table. Every whispered word into this room. Every time I pressed my palm against this container and believed something of him was near. 6 years of 3 jobs and $650 a month. For a man who was alive in Nashville and had registered a business 8 months after I buried him. And then a quieter thought, heavier than the first if this urn held sand, then something else had come out of the Millington fire. Someone had. There had been a body. There had been remains processed and placed in this container and handed to me in a velvet bag. Someone had gone to work on a night that had been arranged to be his last, and had been buried under a name that was not his own. I did not know his name yet. But he had existed, and he had been in this urn, and for 6 years he had received my grief, while the man responsible built a new life 60 miles away. I don't know your name, I thought, but I know you were real. When this is done, when all of it is done, I will make sure someone says it. The soft creak of Isaiah's door. Bare feet on the hallway floor. I moved fast, lid back on the urn, sand tipped carefully inside lid, pressed closed. On my feet by the time he appeared in the doorway, rubbing one eye hair pressed flat from the pillow. "Mama, why are you on the floor?" I made my face do the thing it had learned in 6 years of hard mornings. "Just saying goodnight to Daddy, baby. Go back to sleep." He looked at me with heavy, half-asleep eyes, nodded, and shuffled back down the hall. I waited for the sound of his bed springs settling. Then I stood alone and looked at the urn. For 6 years, I had ended every night at this altar the same way: "Good night, baby." A small, private thing. The last threat I had. Tonight, the words did not come. I turned off the candle and walked down the hall to my room. For the first time in 6 years, I did not call him anything at all. Laverne had picked Isaiah up at 7 the night before. Without questions and without fuss, she had simply appeared at the door with a container of her sweet potato casserole and told Isaiah they were going to watch a movie and he could stay up until 9. Isaiah had gone happily, backpack over one shoulder, and I had stood on the porch and watched them walk next door until the door closed behind them. Then I had gone inside, sat on the edge of my bed, and waited for morning. I did not sleep. I did not try to sleep. I sat with the lights off and the house quiet around me. And I let myself think through everything that was going to happen once this day was done, the things that would change, the things that could not be unchanged. The particular kind of courage required to drive toward a truth you have already partly seen and can no longer pretend not to know. At 4:30, I got up, put on dark clothing, and made coffee. Harriet was at my door at 5. She had a thermos of her own coffee and a folder on the back seat and the focused quiet of someone who had done surveillance work for 18 years and knew how to make a long drive useful. She had spent the week doing what she called the second-layer public property records, business registration cross-references, and skip tracing a legal, methodical process of following a paper trail from the LLC's Nashville mailbox service address back to the residential address connected to it. By Thursday, she had an address in Belle Meade. We pulled out of Memphis while the city was still dark. I-40 East runs 212 miles from Memphis to Nashville, straight through the middle of Tennessee. In the early morning, with no traffic, it moves fast, flat farmland giving way to rolling hills past Jackson. The sky lightening from black to gray to the pale early blue that comes just before sunrise. I watched it through the passenger window and let the miles pass without trying to put words to any of it. Harriet drove and didn't push conversation. She understood I needed the 3 hours to be alone inside my own head. Isaiah was at Laverne's. He was safe. He had sweet potato casserole and a movie, and the uncomplicated company of a woman who loved him without agenda. I thought about the sand in my palm under the candlelight, about the 6-year weight of it, not the physical weight, but the other kind, the one that had been pressing on my chest since Friday night. Then I stopped thinking about the past and made myself think forward, because that was the only direction that mattered now. The first time I came to Nashville, I was 37 years old and newly married, and Desmond had bought me a red rose from a vendor outside Union Station and told me Nashville was the city of love songs. I had believed him. I had believed most things he told me for most of the time I knew him, because nothing in his face had ever suggested I shouldn't. I thought about that woman, 37, tired, happy, holding a red rose on a sidewalk in Nashville, and then I let her go. Belle Meade sits in the southwestern corner of Nashville, a small incorporated municipality surrounded by the city. Known for wide streets lined with old hardwoods and houses set back behind long driveways and iron fencing. Average home values run well above $1 million. The kind of neighborhood where lawns receive professional attention and cars and driveways are never more than 3 years old. Harriet turned off the main road and pulled to the curb on a quiet residential street with a clear sightline to the property. She cut the engine. The house sat approximately 300 feet away, white painted brick. 2 stories, a wide front porch with columns, a black iron fence along the perimeter. The lawn was the deep, even green of grass that receives professional attention. A stone pathway led from the gate to the front door. I had scrubbed tile floors on my knees for that gate. I had sorted hospital laundry at 5 in the morning for that lawn. I had worked Friday dinner service at the diner on Summer Avenue, coming home after midnight with my feet aching and my uniform smelling like the fryer for those porch columns and that stone pathway. $650 a month every month, for 6 years, and it had come here. Harriet handed me the binoculars from her kit bag, compact high magnification. Standard equipment for someone who spent a significant portion of her professional life watching things from a distance. I adjusted them and focused on the front of the house. We waited. 20 minutes before the front door opened. He came out first. No beard. No low-pulled hat. No navy blue shirt worn to blend into a Memphis crowd. He was dressed in light gray slacks and a white collared shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, the way he used to dress on Saturday mornings when he was planning something he considered important. His hair was close-cut and neat. He looked through the binoculars, exactly like a man with nowhere to hide and no reason to. He looked like Desmond. Not like someone who resembled Desmond. Not like a trick of distance and wishful memory. Like Desmond, the original, unaltered, present in full. A woman came out behind him, tall with long hair catching the morning light, wearing a silk wrap in pale gold. She said something, and he turned toward her, and I watched the expression move across his face, easy, unguarded, the full, open smile of someone completely at home in their life. I had kept a photograph of that smile on a table in my living room. I had talked to it in the dark. I lowered the binoculars, then raised them again, because I needed to be sure. Desmond turned slightly toward the street, a passing car, a sound, something, and for 3 or 4 seconds his face was aimed directly down the road toward where we were parked. Clear in the morning light, unmistakable, no doubt. No more telling myself I was imagining things. No more managing the evidence toward a conclusion that hurt less. That was my husband. Harriet's hand came down over mine where it was gripping the door handle. Not yet, she said quietly. We need everything before we move. Documents, timeline, witnesses on record. We go in when we have everything. I lowered the binoculars to my lap. I watched Desmond say something to the woman in the silk wrap, and she laughed the easy private laugh of two people who had been laughing together long enough that it came without effort. He put his hand briefly at the small of her back as they moved toward the side of the house, and then they were gone. Harriet started the engine. I did not cry on the drive back. I watched Tennessee move backward through the passenger window and felt the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from something that has moved past the point where feeling is the first available response. By the time Memphis came into view on the horizon, I had already started organizing what I knew, not by grief, but by category. What was provable, what still needed to be proven, what Harriet had and what she still needed to find. The crying, if it came, would come later. Right now there was work to do, and I was, if nothing else, a woman who knew how to work. Monday came without asking whether I was ready. 4:30 alarm, uniform, coffee, Isaiah's breakfast on the table. 6 years of the same sequence. Except that morning, I sat in the parking lot behind the laundry facility on Elvis Presley Boulevard and looked at my hands on the steering wheel before going in. The cracked knuckles, the dry skin that no cream ever fully fixed. The hands of a woman who had worked 3 jobs for 6 consecutive years. 6 years I had looked at these hands and thought, this is what love costs. That morning, I thought something different. This wasn't sacrifice. This was evidence. Every crack, every chemical burn, every early morning taken from me by a man who had been alive the entire time, who had sat down and planned his exit while I was still trusting him. These hands weren't a monument. They were a record of what he stole. I got out of the car and went to work. The laundry facility moved the way it always did. Conveyor linen bins, the chemical smell I'd long since stopped noticing. My hands sorted and my mind worked separately, circling the same question since Saturday. The sawmill had carried a commercial insurance policy, a property and liability policy that would pay out in the event of fire with confirmed fatalities. I had received the employee death benefit $32,000 that lasted 4 months, but that was a separate rider entirely. The commercial policy paid to a named beneficiary. I had never asked whose name that was. I had been a 31-year-old widow with a 3-year-old son signing documents I didn't fully understand, trusting that someone official was asking the right questions. That morning, I realized I had no idea whether anyone had asked anything at all. At the office building on Madison Avenue, Sterling was up on a stepladder in the 3rd-floor lobby when I came in with the cleaning cart around 3 o'clock. He looked down when he heard me, said, "Hey." I said, "Hey." I started on the windows. I made it through one panel before I put down the squeegee and turned around. Sterling was still on the ladder watching me with the same patient expression he'd been giving me for 2 years, the look of a man who had decided to leave a door open and wait. Sterling, I said. Yeah. No, I said. To the question you keep not asking out loud. No, I'm not okay. I haven't been okay in a long time. He came down off the ladder, pulled 2 chairs out from the break alcove, sat down in one, and waited. I sat in the other and told him enough: the debt, the 6 years, the envelope, the Nashville villa, the sand in the urn. I told it plainly because I was past the part where telling it made me cry. He listened the way Harriet listened, completely, without filling the silence or redirecting toward himself. When I finished, he said, "What do you need?" Not, "That's terrible." Not, "I can't believe it." Just, "What do you need?" I told him I didn't know yet, but I was getting close. When you know, he said, "You tell me." We went back to work. Hospital night shift. My break at 11. The long second-floor corridor outside the cardiac unit. White walls, fluorescent light. The deep quiet that belongs only to hospitals after midnight. Harriet's text had come in at 10:15. "Call me on your break. I have something." She picked up on the second ring. The commercial policy on the sawmill, she said, was claimed 6 months after the fire. April 2019. Through a holding entity that traces back to the Nashville LLC, $200,000. Moved through 2 accounts before it disappeared. I pressed my back against the wall. Above me, acoustic tile and fluorescent hum. "There's something worse," she said. "Tell me." A cash deposit of $15,000 to Raymond Caldwell, a contracted state medical examiner for Shelby County. September 2018, 2 weeks before the fire. She paused. Caldwell signed the identification report confirming the second body as Desmond. The dental records he used had been altered 3 months earlier, July 2018, at the clinic. Someone had switched Desmond's file with the second victim's before the fire ever happened. 3 months of planning, at minimum. July 2018. Isaiah had been 3 years old. I had a photograph of Desmond at the church picnic that summer, laughing at the grill. That same month, he had been arranging for another man's death to stand in for his own. "The second victim," I said. "Who was he?" "His name was Jerome Ellis," Harriet said. "Worked the Millington facility for 8 months. No next of kin on file. No emergency contact. No family came forward." A pause. "He was 31 years old." 31. I walked to the window at the end of the corridor. A narrow rectangle of dark glass, the hospital parking lot below orange streetlights in the wet pavement. Jerome Ellis, 31 years old, hired in February, dead by October. Buried under a stranger's name in a grave. Nobody visited his own name on no marker because the official record said he'd never been there at all. I had stood before the urn on Friday night and thought someone real died. I will not forget him. Now I had his name. I made him a promise before I knew who he was, I said. Harriet was quiet. "I'm keeping it," I said. She exhaled slowly. "Then let's build something worth keeping it with. I'm taking everything to Norbert this week. Lawyer review, then Alfonso." I said goodnight. Stood at the window a moment longer. Jerome Ellis. I said his name once quietly to the dark glass. Then I picked up my mop and went back to work. Thursday evening, the week moved the way that week had moved, in shifts and silences, and the space between things that needed to be done and things that needed to be felt. I had worked the laundry facility and the office building and half a hospital night shift since Monday. I had spoken to Harriet twice briefly about what Norbert would need. I had kept Isaiah's routine intact: dinner, bath, homework, the small, predictable architecture of a child's weeknight, because I had learned over 9 years of motherhood. That routine was the thing that told a child the world was still holding even when it wasn't. Thursday evening, Isaiah finished his homework, packed his books into his bag, with the deliberate care he used when something else was on his mind. I was sitting on the sofa with a cup of tea that had gone cold, watching nothing in particular on the television. He came and sat down beside me. Then he reached over and turned the TV off himself. I looked at him. He was sitting straight, both hands in his lap, his face arranged with the particular seriousness of a child who has made a decision that cost him something to make. "Mama," he said, "I need to tell you something." A pause. I've been holding it for a long time. I set down the cup. I turned to face him. I folded my hands in my lap and I made my face do the thing I had been teaching it to do for weeks. Open, steady, safe. I'm listening, baby, I said. Take all the time you need. He started 2 years ago. A man had appeared at Henrietta's on a Sunday afternoon when Isaiah was 7. Introduced himself as an old friend of Daddy's, said he'd known Desmond back in the day. Said Grandma Henrietta had asked him to come by. Isaiah said the man knew things. He knew about the church picnic photograph, the one on the refrigerator at Henrietta's. He knew what Desmond's watch looked like. He knew the name of the dog Desmond had grown up with. He knew things that only family knew. I thought he was just a friend, Isaiah said. He was nice at first. I sat still. My hands were interlaced in my lap and I focused on keeping them loose rather than tight, because tight would show. Over the following months, the man came back. Irregularly, unpredictably, sometimes twice in a month, sometimes not for 6 weeks. Each time at Henrietta's, always when Alonzo was watching television in the back room and Henrietta was in the kitchen. The man would sit with Isaiah in the front room and talk. He started saying things different after a while, Isaiah said. He stopped saying he was Dad's friend. He started saying... Isaiah looked at his hands. He said he was Dad, that he hadn't really died, that the fire was a mistake, and he'd had to go away for a while, but he was back now. He said Grandma knew. He said it had to be a secret. I breathed through that, in and out, slow and even. And you believed him? I asked. My voice was gentle, not accusatory, just open. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. He looked like the picture, he said finally. The one on the shelf. He looked like Dad. He glanced up at me. I wanted him to be Dad. I know that doesn't make it... He stopped. It makes complete sense, I said. You don't have to explain that to me. He nodded and something in his shoulders came down a fraction. Then Isaiah told me what the man had said. He said it the way children tell things that have been pressed into them haltingly in pieces, with the particular shame of someone repeating words they knew were wrong, but hadn't known how to reject. That Mama was going to find a new husband and get too busy for Isaiah. That only Grandma Henrietta and Daddy really loved him. That if Isaiah told me what was happening, I would get in trouble with the police, that I had been doing something wrong for years, and the only reason I wasn't in jail was because no one had reported me yet. I sat with those words and I did not let them move my face. What Desmond had done was take the most specific fear available to a 9-year-old boy who had grown up without a father, the fear of losing the one parent he had, and he had made it into a leash. He had made my son afraid of me to keep my son from talking to me. He had walked into a child's love and used it as leverage. I breathed, in and out, loose hands. Isaiah, I said carefully, did Grandma Henrietta ever tell you those things were true, that I was in trouble? He nodded slowly. She said Daddy was telling the truth. She said it was better if I stayed at her house more. Henrietta, confirming it, corroborating the fear to a 7-year-old, then an 8-year-old, now a 9-year-old, who had spent 2 years carrying a weight that didn't belong anywhere near him. Last week, Isaiah said, he told me about the trip. He said it was going to be just the two of them, a long trip somewhere, fun somewhere Isaiah had never been. He said they'd leave soon. He didn't say exactly when. He said it was the biggest secret of all that I absolutely couldn't know, and that if Isaiah came willingly, everything would be fine, but if he made trouble... Isaiah stopped. What did he say would happen if you made trouble? I asked. Isaiah looked at his lap. His voice dropped to nearly nothing. He said you would get hurt. The room went very quiet. I looked at my son, 9 years old. Desmond's eyes, his father's lashes, his own particular way of holding his chin down when he was trying not to cry. 2 years he had carried this. 2 years of Sunday afternoons at Henrietta's, sitting in a front room with a man who looked like a photograph and spoke like a father, and used both of those things to dismantle my child from the inside. Isaiah looked up at me. His eyes were red at the edges. Mama, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave you. but he said if I didn't come willingly, you'd get in a lot of trouble. His voice cracked on the last word. Is any of that true? Any of it? I crossed the space between us and I pulled him into me, both arms, his whole small body against my chest, his face against my shoulder. I held him the way I had held him when he was 3 and couldn't sleep. The way I held him when he was sick. The way you hold a child when you want them to feel the full weight of the fact that they are not alone. I did not cry. I would not cry in front of him. Not tonight, not for this. He needed to feel my steadiness, not my grief. I held him until his breathing slowed, until the small shuddering exhale that meant something was releasing. Then I pulled back and looked him in the face with my hands on his shoulders. Baby. I said, none of that is true, not one word of it. I held his gaze. And I need you to be very brave for Mama right now. Can you do that? He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. Not the small, uncertain nod of a frightened child, but something firmer. Something that had been waiting to come out. Good, I said, because Mama is going to fix everything. I said it to Isaiah, but I was also saying it to the 6 years behind me, to Jerome Ellis, to the urn filled with sand, to every morning I had driven to Whitehaven in the dark, to every envelope and every cracked knuckle, and every night I had talked to a photograph of a man who was sitting in a Nashville villa 60 miles away. I was saying it to all of it, and this time I meant every word. Isaiah had been asleep for 2 hours when Harriet knocked. 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and I had been sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. I wasn't drinking, listening to the house settle around me. When I opened the door, she was standing on the porch with a black canvas bag over one shoulder and the focused, unhurried expression of someone who had spent the drive over deciding exactly how this conversation would go. She came in, set the bag on the kitchen table, and sat down across from me. Before we do anything, she said, we do it right. No shortcuts that blow up in court. I sat down. Tell me. She unzipped the bag and laid out 2 devices on the table between us, both small enough to fit in a closed fist. One was a compact rectangular camera, matte black, with a wide-angle lens no bigger than a shirt button. The other was smaller, still a flat, oval recording device with a magnetic backing and a single indicator light that was currently off. Beside them, a handwritten note in Harriet's precise block lettering, 2 columns of items labeled camera and audio, each with a 1-line legal notation beside it. 18 years, she said, and I have never once let a case fall apart because I cut a corner on collection. I'm not starting now. She looked at me directly. We cannot place anything inside Henrietta's house. Not a camera, not a microphone, not a piece of paper. The moment we do that without her consent, we have committed criminal trespass, and any evidence we collect becomes inadmissible, thrown out before a jury ever sees it. Tennessee courts are not flexible about this. She tapped the table once for emphasis. We do this clean or we don't do it at all. I looked at the 2 devices. So what do we do? She picked up the camera. We use what we're entitled to use. Laverne's porch light was already on when we came up the front walk at 11. She opened the door before we knocked, standing in her housecoat and slippers, arms folded across her chest. With the look of a woman who had been expecting this visit and had already decided what her answer was. Laverne, Harriet said, I need to ask you something. Then come in and ask it, Laverne said, and stepped aside. The 3 of us stood in Laverne's living room, which smelled like the cedar of her furniture and the faint sweetness of the candle she kept on the mantel. The front window faced the street at an angle that gave a clear sight line to the side entrance of Henrietta's building, the same entrance Laverne had described, watching the man use always, for 2 years. Harriet explained what she needed: a small camera mounted inside Laverne's window frame, angled toward the entrance and the public sidewalk. No part of it would be pointed at any private interior space. Under Tennessee law, any person may record activity in a public or semi-public space, a building entrance on a public street, a sidewalk, a parking area from their own private property, provided the recording does not capture the interior of another person's residence. The entrance to Henrietta's building was accessible from the street. The sidewalk was public. The camera would record what anyone standing on that block could see with their own eyes. Everything it captures, Harriet said, is legally obtained. It can go in front of a judge. Laverne had been listening with the stillness she brought to everything that mattered. When Harriet finished, she looked at me, once a look that carried 15 years of knowing each other. The funeral, the casseroles, the Monday morning on the porch steps, and then she turned back to Harriet. "Put it wherever you need, honey," she said, "long as it's needed." Harriet had the camera mounted and calibrated in 12 minutes. It sat in the inner corner of the window frame, barely visible from outside. Lens angled down and across toward the building entrance 40 feet away. High-resolution, low-light, capable motion-activated, transmitting wirelessly to an encrypted folder on Harriet's laptop. She tested the feed twice before we left. Back at my house, sitting again at the kitchen table, Harriet picked up the second device. "This one requires you to understand something before I explain it," she said. "Tennessee is a one-party consent state. That means a recorded conversation is legally obtained as long as at least one party to that conversation has consented to the recording. One person, that's the threshold." I looked at the device. "Isaiah is 9. "Isaiah is 9, she agreed. "And you are his legal guardian. Under parental consent doctrine, a parent or legal guardian may consent on behalf of a minor child for the purpose of monitoring communications or interactions that pose a threat to that child's safety. You're not surveilling Henrietta. You're not recording Alonzo's private conversations. You are placing a protective recording device on your child because an unidentified adult has been accessing him, manipulating him psychologically, and planning to remove him from your custody without your knowledge or consent." She set the device down between us. "The purpose matters legally," she said. "Document the purpose. I'll have your attorney put it in writing before Sunday, a memo recording your stated intent. Protection of a minor from an unauthorized adult with whom the child has been placed in contact without your consent. That memo becomes part of the evidentiary record." I looked at the small oval device for a moment. Then I reached out and picked it up. Isaiah's backpack was hanging on its hook by the front door, the same navy and gray pack he'd carried since second grade, with the interior zippered pocket he never used because he kept everything in the main compartment. The pocket was flat and deep, just wide enough. The device had a magnetic backing that would hold it against the interior fabric without shifting. I walked to the door, unzipped the pocket, and pressed the device in. I stood there with my hand on the bag for a moment. I am protecting my son. That was what this was. Not surveillance, not a trap. A mother placing a shield between her child and a man who had spent 2 years dismantling that child's sense of reality from the inside. I zipped the pocket closed. The camera went live that night. Saturday, 11 to 17 p.m. A black SUV pulled onto the block from the direction of Park Avenue and drove slowly past the building before continuing 2 blocks further and parking on the side street. Harriet had the feed open on her laptop at my kitchen table. I sat beside her and watched the screen. 5 minutes passed. Then a figure appeared at the edge of the frame, moving from the direction of the parked vehicle. Hat pulled low, long beard, hands in the pockets of a dark jacket. Moving with a deliberate, unhurried pace that covered ground efficiently without looking like it was trying to, and the right shoulder sitting lower than the left. The figure reached the side entrance of the building. Paused once, a single brief look left and right, the reflex of a man who had been looking over his shoulder for 6 years. Then a key came out. The door opened. He went in. Harriet zoomed the playback to the moment he turned to check the street, the half-second when the angle of the camera caught the side of his face, before the hat's brim cut it off. Long beard. Different from the Nashville version, but under it, the line of the jaw, the bridge of the nose, the set of the eye in profile. Harriet turned and looked at me without saying a word. I looked at the screen. My hands were flat on the table edge, pressing down. "That's Desmond," I said. Not a question. Not a theory. Not a woman trying to convince herself of something she was afraid to believe. Just the truth said out loud for the first time. And once it was said, It sat in the room differently than it had ever sat in my head, heavier, realer, and for the first time in all of this, something that could be used. Before I reveal what was on that recording, drop "ready" in the comments so I know you're still here. Because what Desmond said next, I don't think you're prepared for it. Just a reminder, some details in this story are fictional shaped to carry a message worth hearing. If you'd rather step away, now is the time. No hard feelings. The phone rang at 6:45 Tuesday morning. I was already awake. I had been awake since 5, the way I often was, now lying in the gray pre-dawn and running through the same inventory of what we had and what we still needed. When Harriet's name came up on the screen, I answered before the second ring. "Come over right now." Her voice was level the way it always was, but something underneath it had shifted a density, a weight that wasn't usually there. "Don't bring Isaiah." I was out the door in 4 minutes, still in my pajama top, a jacket thrown over it, keys in hand. Harriet's apartment was already fully lit when I arrived. The laptop was open on the coffee table, 2 legal pads beside it, covered in her block handwriting, a cold cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She had been at this for a while. She did not say good morning. She sat down in front of the laptop, gestured for me to sit beside her, and said, "I'm going to show you 2 things. Watch them in order." The first thing was the camera footage from Laverne's window. Harriet pulled up a log she had built over the past 3 days, a spreadsheet with 2 columns. One column listed the dates Laverne had verbally confirmed seeing the man in the hat and beard over the past 2 years. The second column listed the dates I had delivered the monthly $650 to Henrietta's P.O. box, which Harriet had pulled from my own bank statements. She had requested those from me 2 weeks ago, and I had given them to her without fully understanding why. Now I understood. Of the 14 delivery dates in the past 14 months, 12 of them were followed within 24 to 48 hours by one of Laverne's confirmed sightings. The 2 exceptions were months when Laverne had been visiting her sister in Knoxville. Harriet let me look at the spreadsheet for a moment. Then she said, "He comes to collect. Every time you pay, he comes to confirm it and to maintain contact with the situation. This isn't just a man hiding from his past. This is a man who has been actively monitoring his operation." I looked at the columns. The alignment was not a coincidence. No coincidence had 14 data points. "Ah, and last Saturday," Harriet said, pulling up the camera footage. "We have him on record." She let the clip run the SUV, the figure emerging the walk, the key, the half-second profile under the streetlight before the brim cut it off. "That footage is time-stamped, encrypted, and stored on a server I control. Chain of custody is clean." She closed the footage window. "Now," she said, "the second thing." She opened an audio file. The recording from Isaiah's backpack had been triggered last Sunday. At Henrietta's voice activated, it had run for 31 minutes. Harriet had cleaned the audio, filtered the background noise, and isolated the 3 primary voices: Desmond, Henrietta, Alonzo. I recognized Desmond's voice in the first 3 seconds before he finished his first sentence. 6 years and a changed life, and the voice was exactly the same, that particular cadence. The slight drop at the end of declarative sentences, the way he said certain words, as though they'd already been settled before he said them out loud. I sat on Harriet's couch and I listened. The first several minutes were practical arrangements, logistics dates, the plane tickets, a storage unit in Nashville where documents were being held, a name I didn't recognize, a man Desmond referred to only by a nickname who was apparently handling the fabricated financial records that would form the basis of the fraud charge against me. Harriet paused the recording there. "The financial fraud frame-up," she said, "requires him to file something with a court or law enforcement agency, a report, a complaint, forged documents. The moment he does that under a false identity or as a legally deceased person, he adds multiple federal charges to everything else we already have." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said most things. Harriet had been quietly pulling public records since my first call in September. She told me later she had begun the same night I stayed on the line. "His plan has a structural flaw he doesn't know about." "Mick, what flaw?" "He's legally dead. He cannot file for emergency custody of Isaiah without first petitioning the court to vacate his death declaration, which is a public proceeding that would immediately expose his identity. Either he doesn't know that, or he's planning to do this outside of any court system, which means the custody he's planning to claim is not legal custody. It's abduction. She looked at me. In Tennessee, that's a Class A felony. She pressed play. Henrietta's voice came on. I had heard it for 6 years, but never like this. Never unguarded. Never in a room where she thought no one was listening. She asked why Desmond couldn't simply let her take Isaiah to Nashville herself and avoid the risk of coming back to Memphis. Desmond laughed. It was the same laugh I had heard from the stairwell in October, the one that had disappeared under the television volume. Up close through the recording, it was fuller easy, self-satisfied. The laugh of a man entirely comfortable with his own cleverness. Because I want to do it myself, Ma. I need to be there in person. A pause. Besides, Loretta doesn't suspect anything. That woman has been paying us for 6 years without asking a single question. She doesn't have the nerve to come after me. I sat very still. I had heard people be wrong about me before, but I had never heard it said so specifically, so dismissively. By a person who had stood at an altar with me and said words that were supposed to mean something. She doesn't have the nerve. Harriet did not look at me. She let it play. Alonzo's voice came in briefly, the low, accommodating murmur of a man who had long since ceded the decisions to others. He said something about the timing. Desmond answered with a date. 2 weeks out. Then Desmond's voice changed. The ease went out of it. What came in its place was something flat and cold and entirely without sentiment. 2 weeks. We get the boy, we get on that plane, and Loretta can rot in a cell for all I care. A brief pause. She never meant nothing to me. She was just convenient. Harriet stopped the recording. The room went silent in the absolute way that only happens after something that cannot be taken back. I sat with it for 3 or 4 seconds. I let it finish landing. I let it sit where it needed to sit, not pushed away, not managed, just fully received. Then I stood up. No tears, no shaking. No sound that wasn't words. I looked at Harriet and I heard my own voice come out steadier than I had known it could be. How long do we have? Harriet turned to the calendar she kept on the wall beside the bookcase, a simple paper calendar, the kind with a large grid for each month. She looked at the date Desmond had spoken in the recording, then at today's date. She looked back at me. 14 days. The Memphis sun was already up by the time I pulled onto my street. Pale and low, the way October sun is not the heavy gold of September, but something thinner, the light of a season that knows it's on its way out. I sat in the car for a moment before going in, not thinking, just looking at the house. Then I looked at the kitchen window. Isaiah was at the table, comic book open flat beside his cereal bowl, chin in one hand, spoon moving automatically from bowl to mouth and back without his eyes ever leaving the page. He had no idea I'd been gone. He had no idea about the recording, the 14 days, the spreadsheet with 14 months of aligned dates. He was 9 years old and eating cereal and reading about a superhero, and that was the whole of his morning. For the first time since this started, not when I'd found the sand in the urn, not when I'd seen Desmond in Nashville, not when I'd heard the recording, I felt the full weight of what I was actually protecting. Not a principle. Not justice. Not even myself. That boy at the table. I got out of the car and went inside and kissed the top of his head, and he said, "Morning, Mama," without looking up from the page. And I went to the kitchen counter and stood there for a minute with my back to him, getting myself together. Harriet picked me up at 9. Norbert Calloway had maintained a law practice on Madison Avenue downtown for 31 years. His office occupied the second floor of a converted brick building 4 blocks from the office building where I cleaned windows 3 afternoons a week, a fact that struck me with a particular irony as we climbed the stairs. He was 62 years old with reading glasses he kept pushed up on his forehead until he needed them, and the patient deliberateness of a man who had spent 3 decades in rooms where getting it wrong had consequences. His assistant had cleared his morning. He was standing when we came in, shook both our hands, and sat down behind his desk without small talk. Harriet laid it out in order. She had organized everything into a single folder: the LLC signature comparison, the camera footage log and time-stamped clip, the audio recording transcript and original file, the Millington Fire timeline, Caldwell's payment record, Jerome Ellis's employment file, the insurance payout trail. Norbert put on his glasses and went through each item in silence. 15 minutes, not a word. Then he set down the last page, took off his glasses, and looked at Harriet. "This is actionable," he said. "All of it. Chain of custody is clean on the electronic evidence. The audio is legal under Tennessee one-party consent with guardian documentation. The financial trail has enough anchoring points for a prosecutor to build on." He paused. "You have more than most people walk in here with." Then he picked up one final document, the single handwritten page Henrietta had placed in front of me at the funeral home 6 years ago. I had brought it at Harriet's request, pulled from the file box where it had sat since the night I'd signed it. He looked at it for perhaps 30 seconds. Then he set it on the desk and looked at me. "This document is legally worthless," he said. It was not unkind the way he said it, just precise. Under Tennessee law, a surviving spouse has no obligation to pay the personal debts of a deceased partner unless they were a co-signer on the original loan agreement. This paper identifies no creditor. It carries no notarization. It has no enforceable terms. It references a debt with no documented origin. He folded his hands on the desk. "What this document is, Loretta, is a piece of paper someone frightened a grieving woman into signing. It has never, not from the moment you signed it, had any legal force." I sat across from him and I let that settle. 6 years, 3 jobs, 72 envelopes, $46,800 scraped from floors and laundry lines and diner counters paid to a P.O. box, under obligation to a document that had never meant anything. Void, from the beginning. "Can she recover what she paid?" Harriet asked. "That's a civil matter and a conversation for another day," Norbert said. "But the short answer is yes. What was paid under coercion to a fraudulent claim is recoverable." He looked at me. "One thing at a time," I nodded. "One thing at a time." Memphis Police Department headquarters sat on Poplar Avenue, a building I had driven past 1,000 times over 57 years without ever having reason to go inside. That afternoon, Harriet and I sat across a table from Detective Alfonso Briggs in a second-floor conference room with a window that looked out over the parking structure. Alfonso was 51, broad-shouldered, with the particular stillness of a man who had spent decades in rooms where patience was an occupational skill. He had worked homicide and major crimes for Memphis PD for 22 years. Harriet had worked with him on 2 prior cases. She had called him Monday evening, and he had cleared his Tuesday afternoon without being asked twice. He went through the evidence folder the same way Norbert had, methodically, without comment, giving each item the time it needed. When he finished, he closed the folder and set it in front of him with both hands flat on the table. "We have enough to move," he said. "Not today, I need time to coordinate, but we have enough." He looked at me directly. "What your husband did, Mrs. Loretta, constitutes arson in the first-degree insurance fraud at the federal and state-level forgery of official documents, bribery of a state medical examiner, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping of a minor." He let each item land before moving to the next. "When we move on everything at once, Memphis and Nashville simultaneously, Desmond, Henrietta, Alonzo, and the medical examiner Caldwell, whom I'll be coordinating with the TBI on separately." He asked me 2 operational questions. Could I maintain normal behavior for 10 more days, continue Isaiah's Sunday visits, make no unusual changes to my routine that might alert Desmond, and could I document any further contact from Henrietta or Alonzo in writing, including text messages? I said yes to both. "Then go home," he said. "Keep living your life. Let us build what we need to build, and call Harriet if anything changes." Harriet drove me back through the early afternoon city. We didn't say much. There was a particular kind of quiet that settles after a meeting like that. When everything has been said to the people who needed to hear it, and now the waiting begins. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket as we crossed the Poplar Bridge. I looked at the screen. A text from Henrietta's number. Bring Isaiah this Sunday. His grandfather wants to see him one more time before his trip. I read it. I read it again. One more time before his trip. She had not said Isaiah's trip. She had said his trip, Alonzo's, presumably the cover story they had constructed. But the phrasing was wrong in the way that lies go wrong when the person telling them is not used to keeping the story straight. One more time before his trip was the sentence of a woman thinking about a departure she knew was coming, using the word his to refer to a person who was not the grandfather. Henrietta had just put the plan in a text message. I put the phone back in my jacket pocket. I looked out the window at the city going by the river, catching afternoon light on the left, the downtown buildings passing on the right. Memphis doing what Memphis always did, moving and settling and holding itself together. I did not text back. I did not react. I simply noted it the way I had been learning to note things calmly, precisely, without letting it show on my face. Evidence, I thought. Another piece of evidence. Harriet came over at noon, an hour before I needed to leave. She had the body recorder in a small zip pouch, a flat rectangular device the size of 2 stacked quarters, with an adhesive backing designed to sit against skin without shifting. She showed me where to place it, upper center of my torso below the collarbone, where the fabric of a shirt would hold it steady, and a normal speaking voice would register clearly. She had tested the transmitter range the previous day. Everything it picked up would go directly to her laptop running in her car, parked 2 blocks from Henrietta's building. Keep your voice at a normal level, she said. Don't lean forward when they speak. You don't need to position the device, it will catch everything in the room. And don't look down at your chest. She smoothed the fabric over it once to confirm there was no outline. You've been doing this for 6 years, Loretta. You know how to sit in that apartment. Just do what you've always done. One more Sunday, I said. One more Sunday, she confirmed. I had dressed carefully. The good burgundy blouse, not the one I kept for important occasions that would read as unusual, but the other one, the dark red, with the small buttons. The one I had worn to Henrietta's 2 or 3 times before. Familiar. Unremarkable. I had pinned back my hair the way I always pinned it for Sunday visits, and I had put on the earrings Desmond had given me in the first year of our marriage, small gold drops, simple. The kind of thing I still wore occasionally because stopping would have required explaining why I'd stopped. Today they were costume, but they had to look like habit. Henrietta opened the door before Isaiah finished knocking. She was smiling. Not her usual smile, the careful transactional expression she kept for me, the one that acknowledged my presence without welcoming it. This was warmer, more open. Her hand went to Isaiah's shoulder first, the way it always did, but then she looked past him at me and said something she had not said in 6 years of Sunday visits. Loretta, come on in. I made sweet tea. I smiled back with the full warmth of a woman who found this completely normal, and I stepped inside. The apartment was different. Not rearranged, nothing was out of place but cleaned more thoroughly than its usual state, the surfaces wiped down. A scented candle on the side table that I had never seen there before, and underneath the candle smells something else, the faint, fading presence of a men's cologne that had no business being in an apartment occupied by 2 people in their late 70s who did not receive visitors. Someone had been here recently. Not long before I arrived, I sat down on the sofa that Henrietta directed me to, and I held my hands in my lap, and I smiled at Henrietta's stories about the neighbor downstairs and the church auxiliary meeting. And I listened with my face while my mind was doing something else entirely. Alonzo sat in his chair across the room. He had not spoken since I came in. He was a man who had always been quiet, the background figure in a household that Henrietta ran, but today, his quiet was different. He kept looking at me in a way he had never looked at me in 18 years of knowing each other. Not hostile, not evasive. Something more unsettled than either of those. He looked like a man sitting with something he could not put down and could not keep holding. Isaiah had disappeared into the back room with the old handheld game console Henrietta kept for him there. I could hear the faint electronic sounds of it down the hall. Henrietta said she was getting water and went to the kitchen. The room had been quiet for perhaps 4 seconds when Alonso leaned forward in his chair. He moved slowly the way very old men move when their bodies require negotiation, and he brought himself close enough that what he said next would not carry past the two of us. His voice was low, not a whisper exactly, but the tone of a man who had made a decision at significant cost to himself and was delivering it before he lost the nerve. "Child," he said, "you need to take your boy and go far away from here." I looked at him. I kept my face still. "Don't ask me why," he said. His hands were on his knees pressing down. "Just go, while you still can." He held my eyes for a moment, the eyes of a man in his 80s who had stayed quiet too long about too many things and was at the last possible moment choosing otherwise. "Take Isaiah and go." He looked like a man who had been calculating something for a long time and had finally arrived at the only answer that let him sleep at night. Then he straightened up slowly with the effort it had cost him to lean in, and he got to his feet and walked down the short hallway to the bedroom and closed the door. The whole thing had taken less than 30 seconds. Henrietta came back with 2 glasses of sweet tea on a small tray. She set one in front of me and settled into her chair and resumed the story about the auxiliary meeting as though nothing had interrupted it, because as far as she knew, nothing had. I held the cold glass and smiled and responded at the appropriate moments and let Henrietta's voice fill the room. In my head, I was playing back every word Alonso had said. The exact phrasing, the pressure of his hands on his knees, the particular weight in his eyes, not the weight of a man passing on gossip, but the weight of a man who knew something specific and had been living with the knowing of it and was no longer willing to take it with him to whatever came next. He knows everything. Not the outline of it, everything. And whatever arrangement he had made with his conscience over 6 years of silence, it had just shifted. The recorder under my shirt was running. Every word Alonso had said was on it. I sat in Henrietta's clean apartment in the chair she had invited me into for the first time in 6 years, wearing the earrings from my first year of marriage, and I held my glass and I smiled and I waited. Isaiah came out at 4:30, game console tucked under his arm shoe, half-laced the way it always was by the end of a Sunday. He said goodbye to Henrietta with the comfortable ease of a child who had spent many Sunday afternoons in this apartment. And Henrietta held his face in her hands for a moment longer than usual before she let him go. I noted that too. We got to the car. I opened the back door. Isaiah climbed in. I leaned over to buckle his seatbelt the way I still did, even though he was 9 and perfectly capable of doing it himself. It was habit. It was also the position that put my face close enough to his that he didn't have to raise his voice. He grabbed my hand as I reached for the buckle. "Mama." His voice was barely above a breath. "The man said next Saturday we're going on an airplane, him and me. He said it's a surprise and I can't tell you." He looked at me with the expression of a child who has decided that keeping this particular secret is no longer something he is willing to do. "I'm telling you." I clicked the seatbelt into place. I straightened up. I walked around to the driver's side and got in and closed the door and put both hands on the wheel. Not 14 days. 6. My hands were on the wheel the way hands go when the grip comes from somewhere other than intention. I loosened them deliberately, finger by finger. Then I started the engine and pulled away from the curb at exactly the speed I always drove on a Sunday afternoon, with exactly the expression I always wore coming back from Henrietta's. 6 days. Harriet needed to know tonight. Alfonso called at 11:47 while I was still sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot with the engine running. I had just finished my last night shift. The last one I had told myself walking out, not because I was quitting, but because after tomorrow, the reason I had been working 3 jobs would no longer exist. One way or another, after Saturday, the world I had been living in for 6 years was going to be different. I was sitting with that, watching the parking lot lights reflected in a puddle near the drainage grate when the phone rang. "We move tomorrow night," Alfonso said. "Saturday, 5 p.m., be ready." His voice had the same quality it always had, level, precise, no wasted words. Warrants had been processed. Nashville Metro was coordinating on their end. Everything was in place. "I'll be ready," I said. He said goodnight and ended the call. I sat in the dark car for a long time after that, not thinking about anything in particular, just letting the fact of it settle into the body. Tomorrow. After 6 years of mornings that started at 4:30 and ended in the dark, after 72 envelopes and a jar of sand, and a photograph I had talked to, like it could hear me tomorrow. Then I drove home. The house was quiet the way it only was after midnight. Isaiah had been asleep since 9. I had checked before I left for the shift. He was on his side blanket pulled to his chin. The small nightlight in the corner throwing its usual pale circle on the wall. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. While I waited for it, I looked at the table. The envelope was there. White plain, already sealed. $650 in cash this month's, which I had prepared out of habit before the week had turned into what it became. I picked it up and held it for a moment. Turned it over. It looked exactly the same as it had looked every month for 6 years. The same dimensions. The same weight. The same handwritten address on the front. I set it back on the table. This would be the last one. Not because I had finally reached the end of a debt. Because Norbert had sat across a desk from me and said the words I had needed someone to say for 6 years. This document is legally worthless. The debt had never existed. Every envelope had been paid against nothing, against a fear, against a lie, against the careful construction of a grieving woman's compliance. The kettle came to a boil. I poured the water. I sat down. After the tea, I found a piece of paper in the kitchen drawer, the kind Isaiah used for school projects. Plain white, slightly larger than notebook size. I found a pen. I sat at the table for a moment before I started writing. The letter was to Isaiah. I did not think of it as a worst-case letter. I did not allow myself to use that framing, because the framing would feed the fear, and the fear was not something I could afford tonight. I thought of it as a letter for the things that were true regardless of what happened tomorrow, the things I would want him to have in writing, in my own hand, because some things should not only live in memory. I wrote for about 40 minutes. I told him about the day he was born, the specific light in the delivery room, the exact sound he made in the first minute, the way the nurse had said there he is, like his arrival was something the room had been holding its breath for. I told him that every hard morning of the past 6 years had been held up by him, not as a burden, but as a reason. I told him that the man who had called himself his father had made choices that had nothing to do with Isaiah's worth, and that his worth was not determined by anyone's choices, least of all that man's. I told him that Laverne loved him, that Harriet had fought for him, that Sterling had sat down and listened when no one else thought to. I told him I would see him tomorrow. I folded the letter in thirds, wrote his name on the outside, and put it in the back of the kitchen drawer under the extra batteries and the takeout menus. Then I told myself I would not need it. I went to his room. He was still on his side, still breathing in the slow, even rhythm of deep sleep, the nightlight making the same pale circle. I stood in the doorway the way I had stood in doorways for 9 years, just watching him exist the way parents do in the dark, checking something that goes beyond the physical, some persistent need to confirm that the person you love most is still there and still whole. I thought about the dinners I had been too exhausted to eat, but had cooked anyway because he needed to eat. The nights he'd had a fever and I'd sat on the edge of his bed with a cool cloth and run the math on whether I could call in sick to the morning shift. The mornings I had watched him walk into the school building and felt despite everything that there was a reason to come back to this house at the end of the day and start it all again. 6 years of that. 6 years of being the only person standing between him and a world that had already taken his father before he was old enough to know it. Except the father hadn't been taken. The father had chosen to go. There was a difference, and Isaiah would need to understand it someday. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. But someday I would sit with him and explain the difference between absence by death and absence by decision, and I would make sure he understood that neither one was his fault, and neither one diminished him. I stood in the doorway for a while longer. Then I went back to the kitchen. It was past 3 in the morning. The house was completely still, the kind of still that only belonged to the deepest part of the night, when even the street outside had gone quiet, and the only sounds were the refrigerator and the settling of the old walls. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark with my hands around the cold tea mug, and I took stock of what I had. I had Harriet, who had given 18 years of professional skill and 20 years of friendship to this, without being asked twice. I had Laverne, who had opened her door at 11 at night and said, "Put it wherever you need." I had Norbert, who had looked at a 6-year-old lie and named it in one sentence. I had Alfonso, who had listened to everything and said we have enough and meant it. I had Sterling, who had pulled up a chair and waited without requiring anything in return. For 6 years I had done this alone. I was not alone anymore. I sat with that for a while. Let it be real. Let it be the thing I was carrying into tomorrow, instead of the weight I had been carrying for 6 years. The phone buzzed on the table. 3:22 a.m. Harriet. Desmond moved the flights. Departure tomorrow night 10 p.m. He's not waiting for Sunday. He's taking Isaiah tomorrow. I read it once. I read it again. I set the phone face down on the table. I sat in the dark kitchen in the house that was mine, with the letter in the drawer and my son asleep down the hall and 6 years of early mornings and cracked hands and sealed envelopes behind me, and one day left in front of me. Then I stood up. I didn't turn the light on. I didn't need to. I whispered it to the dark kitchen, to the walls, to the 6 years, to Jerome Ellis, to all of it. Then so are we. Isaiah had been at Laverne since 2 in the afternoon. I had driven him over myself, kept it as ordinary as I could, his backpack, his comic books, the container of Laverne's sweet potato casserole she had called ahead to say she was reheating. He had gone happily the way he always did, and I had watched him walk through her front door, and I had stood on the sidewalk for a moment after it closed. Then I had driven home and changed into the black clothing I had set out the night before, and I had stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself. I barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because she seemed diminished, because she seemed larger than the woman I had been looking at for 57 years. Steadier, as though 6 weeks of this, of discovering the truth, piece by piece, of holding it together in front of Isaiah, of sitting in Norbert's office and Alfonso's conference room and Harriet's living room, and never once allowing herself to come apart, had done something permanent to her posture. I stood there for a long moment. Then I picked up my keys. Laverne was on her porch when I came out. She was not pretending to water anything this time. She was just standing there, arms folded, watching me cross the yard to my car. When I looked over, she caught my eye. She nodded once. That was all. No words, no gesture, nothing that required anything back from me. Just the nod of a woman who had known me for 15 years, who had sat with me through a funeral, and 3 years of not understanding, and 2 years of watching a man in a hat walk into the building next door, who had put a camera in her window frame at 11 at night and said, "Put it wherever you need." I nodded back. I got in the car. Alfonso had designated my position 3 days earlier during the final planning session at his office. A corner 40 yards from the side entrance of Henrietta's building public sidewalk, clear sightline to both the front and side outside the active perimeter his team would hold. Close enough to see, far enough to be clear of any movement. He had been specific about it. You stay at the corner until I text you. You do not move until I text you. I was at the corner by 5:45. The Memphis evening was cool. Early October, the light going gold and long, the way it did in the weeks before the clocks changed the neighborhood, moving at its regular Saturday pace. A few cars. A dog being walked, someone's radio coming through a screen door 2 buildings down. Nobody who drove past would have looked at me twice. A woman in dark clothing standing on a corner. Nothing to see. At 6:03 my phone vibrated. Alfonso Nashville team in position. Savannah in custody at the Belle Meade property. No resistance. I read it and put the phone in my jacket pocket. Savannah. In custody. In the house that my $650 a month had helped furnish. In the city I had driven to on a Saturday morning in September and watched through binoculars while something final happened behind my eyes. The Nashville team had moved first as planned, cutting off that end before Desmond could receive a warning from that direction. He would arrive at Henrietta's not knowing that the other half of his life had already been closed. I waited. At 6:44, the black SUV came around the corner from Park Avenue. I recognized the vehicle before I recognized the movement, the same one from the camera footage, the same unhurried approach parking 2 blocks down out of what had become pure habit by now. The figure that came toward the building entrance moved the way it always moved, hat low, hands in jacket pockets, right shoulder lower than the left. He used his key. The side door opened. He went in. 40 seconds later, Alfonso's team went in through the front. I heard it from the corner, the sharp knock of the door, the voices carrying the particular authority of people who do not need to raise them to be obeyed, the sound of movement inside the apartment. It lasted less than 2 minutes. Then a door in the back of the building opened hard. Desmond came out at a run. He made it 6 steps before he saw me. We stood in the narrow concrete corridor behind the building, the kind of utilitarian back passage that existed in every building like this one, lit by a single yellow bulb in a wire cage above the exit door. He had stopped completely. His chest was moving fast from the exertion of running or from something else. And he was looking at me the way people look at something they had calculated out of the realm of possibility. I looked back at him. This was the face I had kept in a photograph for 6 years. The face I had talked to across a candlelit table in my living room, without the beard, without the hat. In the flat yellow light of a back corridor bulb, it was just a face, a man's face, older than the photograph, tighter around the eyes with the particular expression of a person rapidly reassessing. He was looking for the exit calculation. I could see it the way his eyes moved, checking angles, checking the space between us, running the math on whether there was still a move to make. That was what 6 years of watching and planning had built in him, the reflex of a man who always believed there was still an angle. There was no angle. I stood in front of the door he had come through, and I looked at him, and I felt with a clarity that surprised me even then almost nothing. Not hatred, not grief, not the love that had once lived in me for this person that was gone. Had been gone since a Friday night when I had poured sand from a ceramic urn into my palm and understood what 6 years had actually been. What I felt was close to nothing, and nothing I had learned was exactly what he deserved from me. He looked at me for a long moment in the yellow light. "You really did all this," he said. His voice was the same. That same cadence, the same slight drop at the end. I had heard it in a recording 3 weeks ago saying she was just convenient. I let that sit where it needed to sit. "You started it," I said. Then I turned around and walked back toward the corner. I heard Alfonso's voice behind me, steady, professional, carrying the particular weight of a man who had been doing this for 22 years. "You have the right to remain silent." I did not look back. I walked to the corner. I stood in the early evening air, the Memphis light going gold around me, and I took one long breath in and one long breath out. Then I took out my phone and called Laverne. "Go ahead and give him dinner," I said when she picked up. "I'm coming to get him in an hour." "He's fine," she said. "He's been fine the whole time." "I know it," I said. "I know he has." I stood on the corner until the police vehicles had cleared, and then I walked back to my car, and I drove toward the light. The October air hit my face the moment I stepped out of the car. I had barely closed the door when the screen door banged open and small feet hit Laverne's porch boards at a run. Isaiah came off those steps the way he used to at 5 years old, arms wide, no hesitation. He slammed into me at full speed. And I caught him the way you catch something you would sooner break your own bones than drop. His face pressed into the hollow between my jaw and shoulder, and he held on so tightly I could feel his heartbeat knocking against my collarbone like a fist on a door. We stayed like that without speaking. The Memphis night was cold and quiet around us. I pressed my cheek against the top of his head and breathed him in soap, and that particular warmth that belongs only to children who have just stopped being afraid. Laverne appeared in the doorway, backlit by her lamp. She looked at us for a moment, pulled her cardigan closed, and stepped back inside without a word, leaving the door ajar. She always knew which silences belonged to other people. Later, after Laverne had gone to bed, Isaiah and I sat together in her kitchen. I told him what he needed to know, that the man who had visited his grandparents had hurt our family, that the police had caught him, and that none of it had ever been Isaiah's fault to carry. He nodded slowly, then looked up and asked the question he had been circling for months, the one that had come out sideways, as, "Mama, do you have a boyfriend?" And more directly, as, "Are you gonna leave me for a new daddy?" This time he asked it plain. "Mama, are you ever gonna leave me?" I pulled him close and let my presence answer first. Then I said, "Not on purpose, not for anything. And if something ever tried to take me away from you, I would fight it the same way I fought this." He leaned his head against my arm and said, "Okay, that was enough." The trial began the second week of January 2025 in a fourth-floor courtroom on Poplar Avenue. The case had moved faster than most. 3 of the 5 defendants had entered cooperation agreements within the first 30 days of arrest, and that cooperation collapsed the timeline the defense might otherwise have used. Fitzgerald, the assistant district attorney, spent 4 days laying out everything: the Millington sawmill fire, the falsified dental records, the $15,000 cash payment to Raymond Caldwell, and the $200,000 insurance payout claimed through a Nashville shell company. On the 3rd day, he said the name I had been waiting to hear spoken aloud in a room full of people. Jerome Ellis, 31 years old, a mill worker with no living relatives, whose remains had been cremated under another man's name and placed in a terracotta urn where a woman lit a candle for him every night for 6 years without knowing who he actually was. I pressed my hands flat against my knees to keep them still. The verdicts came back on a Thursday afternoon. Desmond received 18 years, 6 counts running consecutively, meaning each sentence served in sequence rather than simultaneously. Henrietta and Alonzo received suspended sentences and a restitution order for $47,000. Henrietta and Alonzo had entered cooperation agreements within the first 30 days of arrest. Their testimony against Desmond had sealed the federal case, and the judge weighed their age and their cooperation together when he handed down the sentence. The full amount I had paid under coercion restitution, being a court-ordered repayment to the victim, not the state. Savannah received 5 years. Caldwell faced separate proceedings. I delivered my victim impact statement and said Jerome Ellis's name on the record for the record, because he had no one else to say it. When I sat back down, Harriet put her hand over mine. By February, I had one job. The $47,000 arrived in 2 installments. I paid off my car, built a small savings, and used part of it to place a gray granite headstone in Millington Cemetery. Jerome Ellis, 1987 to 2018, known and not forgotten. I drove out there alone one Saturday in March. Stood in front of it for a while, said his name once out loud to no one, and everyone then drove home. By April, the Memphis afternoons had softened. Isaiah and I walked to the corner store one Saturday. No reason, just walking, which was something we were learning to do again. On the way back, a woman's large brown dog put both paws on Isaiah's chest, and Isaiah laughed, the way I had not heard him laugh in a long time, unguarded, full-throated, completely unconcerned with who was listening. Half a block later, he said, "Mama, do you think we could get a dog?" So I looked at this child who had once answered every question with one word, who had whispered secrets in his sleep that were never his to keep, who had stood on a cold porch and asked me the question that had always really been a statement: "I need you to stay." "Yeah," I said. "I think we could figure that out." He kicked a pebble off the sidewalk and kept walking. The Memphis sun was warm on the back of my neck. Somewhere ahead of us, the street opened up toward home. I kept walking too. Looking back at everything that happened, I know one thing for certain: God never lets us walk alone, even when the road is too dark to see our own feet. This is a family drama story that I lived from the inside, and I won't pretend I handled it perfectly. I signed papers out of fear. I stayed silent for 6 years. I let grief become a habit. So if these family revenge stories have taught you anything, let it be this: don't be like me. Don't sign what you haven't read. Don't let anyone plant fear into your child's heart and call it love. My honest opinion, the most painful betrayal doesn't come from an enemy. It comes from the person whose photograph you kept on your altar and spoke to every night. But the most powerful family drama story is never about revenge. It's about a woman who chose to stand up, trust the right people, and let the truth speak for itself. These family revenge stories don't end in a courtroom. They end in a quiet morning when you look at your child and know it was all worth it. If this family drama story moved something in, you leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and stay close for what comes next. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. That means everything. Note: upcoming stories may contain fictional elements created purely for educational and entertainment purposes. If this content isn't for you, that's completely okay. Please feel free to choose something that suits you better.
That's the story. I hope it stay with you. I will see you in the next one.